it was indifferent to entrepreneurs. And in some ways, this goes back to the problems with sociology, because, you know, there's, what is that? What's the phrase? There's Victor Hugo. There's nothing more powerful in the world than what? Who knows the end of that quote? Than an idea whose time has come, right? An idea whose time has come will change the world. So is that true? Is that true? Is an idea whose time has come really that powerful? Environmentalism, right? That's come, right? Are we still driving SUVs? I mean, the idea that ideas alone change society is one of the real problems, and the idea that the notion that ideas themselves have a kind of historical power is very problematic. What does have historical power are institutions. As William James said, we need to take institutions to ideas so that those ideas really have great traction. And actually, where you've seen both positive and negative social changes, and you could look at whether it's terrorism, or you can look at some of the political movements in the country that are happening today, look at the quality of the institutions that people have built, and you'll see why certain ideas are in ascendance, and why other ideas that are better ideas, and even more popular ideas, have less power. Okay, it's the quality of the institutions. So how do we build great institutions? How many people here have taken a finance course? Put up your hand if you've taken a finance course. Okay, so what we have in the social sector is 1 million great ideas and like 10 great institutions. You know, I mean, basically. I mean, you know, that's an exaggeration, but there's very few. If you look at the largest nonprofits in the United States today by revenues, most of them were started before 1920. Okay? If you look at the largest companies in the United States, look at the Dow Index, I think a half of them were added since 1980. I think a third were added since 1990. So how do you get great institutions in the private sector that only take 20 years to build, in some cases 10 years to build? Look at Facebook, right? Well, you have financing. You have this totally different financing mechanism. You're not filling up the bathtub one spoonful at a time. You're creating these really cool financing mechanisms to make social change happen in a different way. Bill Drayton, the guy who founded Ashoka, told me that 10% of people in the United States work in finance, right, in some way. I don't know if that figure is accurate, but let's say it is. The whole field of finance has to become more responsive to all of these changes that are happening with social institutions. We currently do not have social finance as a field. We're beginning to see things like impact investing, things like private equity equivalents in the nonprofit sector, things like patient capital. This is just the beginning, just the beginning. If any of you are really interested in finance and you kind of think it's a cool thing to do, to be in finance, pay attention to the fact that Morgan Stanley created a social finance unit a couple of years ago, and they got 1,000 internal emails of people who wanted to go into that unit or wanted to help out. This is something that's really, really going to be very important in the future, because the way we're financing social change today makes no sense whatsoever. We don't have the capacity to grow institutions. We don't have the ability to make social entrepreneurs, you know, go the equivalent of public and things like that. And so this will require both really important changes in terms of connecting with governments in a whole new way, and also understanding how finance works, what different levels of capital do, what different risk profiles, people with different risk profiles are interested in doing. And so there's all these very, very creative people out there that are kind of doing this. And it seems a little bit mundane and almost a little technocratic. But that's one area that is very, will make a big difference over the next 10 years in terms of growth and so forth. Probably for me, the most interesting change that's happening in the world today, and I'm probably going to write a whole book about this, is we're beginning to realize that human beings are not rational, that this idea of economic man and so forth, it's really constrained our policy and so forth. And some of the stories that I've written in recent years that have really excited me a lot are stories that show that we can actually teach empathy very effectively. One organization in Canada called Roots of Empathy, which now works in tens of thousands of classrooms across the country, is able to show that with their, quote, social technology, they're able to dramatically increase the level of empathy and positive social interaction among children between kindergarten and grade 8. And they reduce bullying in schools. They create more peaceful school environments. Now, how do you teach children empathy? Well, there's lots of different ways to do it, but do you know what? The most effective way is to bring a baby into a classroom. A little baby who starts at 3 months old and the children get to interact with on an ongoing basis. And there's a very, very interesting thing about empathy, because our brains are wired to be empathic, but we have to have experiences that draw that out of us. And if we don't get it in our families, in some ways the society has to kind of compensate for what the family may not have given the child. So it turns out that if you actually are in contact with a baby, there's two things that happen with empathy. One is you have to be able to take someone else's perspective. Perspective taking is the cognitive piece of empathy. You have to be able to look at the world from another person's point of view. Many of you, I know, are interested in working in other cultures, right? You want to go to another part of the world and work in another continent and another culture. Perspective taking is one of the crucial skills. You'll have to be able to see the world from a different culture, from their point of view. How do you do that, to step into someone else's shoes? So the cognitive aspect of empathy is very important to develop. And actually, it's not something that, it's like a muscle. It's not something you just have or you don't have. It's something that you practice. And if we give children the opportunity to practice empathy, they actually become kinder to each other in a really dramatic way. By the way, the United States has a huge bullying problem. I don't know if you know, the Department of Education has a bullying task force. It's considered an epidemic across the country. Kids are not being, not just like punch Joey on the schoolyard, but really means cyberbullying, stuff that is very painful. So the other piece of empathy that's important is the caring aspect of it, that you actually feel that another person's well-being it's incumbent on you to take responsibility for another person's well-being. So bringing babies into classrooms with little children, many of whom have come from very, very tough, and in some cases abusive families, has been shown to be able to elicit this skill in a powerful way, in a very surprising way. So if you look at many social change problems that don't get solved, you'll often find that the weak link is the fact that we don't really know how to change people's behavior very well. When we tell people not to smoke or to reduce their sugar or fat intake, but people we don't know how to change their behavior. But what's happening now is there's this whole field of behavioral economics, predictably irrational, books like Predictably Irrational, Nudge, in the developing world, Beyond Good Intentions by Dean Carlin. My colleague at the New York Times, Tina Rosenberg, just wrote a fantastic book, which I highly recommend, called Join the Club, which talks about the social cure, how peer pressure can transform the world. It's about harnessing our need to, all around the world, of how you can actually harness peer pressure to get people to change their sexual behavior in South Africa, to reduce HIV. It's been shown to be the single most important intervention in reducing HIV, new infections of HIV in South Africa.